Welcome to this latest Tile 9 video, and this is the fourth episode, and I feel as though I haven't really introduced myself. So what I'm going to do in this video is talk about the road to Tile 9, how Tile 9 came about. And we're sitting here at the beach, and it's a March evening, it's cold, it's windy outside, but we're nice and warm and cozy in here. And the story I'm going to tell is in three parts, really. So the story begins in my early to mid-teens, I suppose, and that's about 35 years ago, at a time when I was starting to realise that who I was perhaps something that could be changed, that could be formed in different ways, and that maybe who I was more of a product of my environment than anything else, and that if I could take more control over it, then my development could go in directions of my choosing. And I remember talking to people about this at the time, and people were saying to me, you can't change who you are, which took me a bit by surprise, I have to say. But of course, they were the same age as me, so they didn't really have any more information than I did. And also at the time I was reading about things like, well, enlightenment, for example, which sounded really attractive to me. I mean, why wouldn't it? But the books I was reading, the material I was reading, made it sound so difficult, so out of reach, so almost unattainable, really, to the point where I figured that it was not going to be possible for me to achieve. And as a result, I suppose I got lost in the worldly stuff, just like everybody else, really. You asked me what it's like to be a teenager. A, it was a long time ago, and B, we all know what teenagers are like. I was a good boy. That's the thing, you see. I wasn't rebellious in any way. I was perhaps dissatisfied with stuff. The decision or the movement away from stuff that I was interested in, the spiritual side of stuff, and towards the more worldly stuff, that movement left me dissatisfied. It wasn't a conscious decision for me to leave enlightenment behind. Or maybe it was, but I just realized that, at one point I thought to myself, if it really is about reincarnation and lifetimes and stuff, I'll do as much as I can in this lifetime and then I'll get it next time. It seems too difficult to get in this lifetime, but I'll do a little bit and then I'll be much closer next time around. So if we fast forward 10 years or so, I found myself in my mid to late 20s in Germany, working in banking, very unsatisfied with what I was doing. I worked for Credit Suisse in Frankfurt, and there was a guy in my department who'd been there for 25 years. He was a yoga teacher, and he said to me about my ups and downs, your highs and lows of life. He said, you need to be here. I was 26 or something, 27. Like, no, I don't. I need to be here more often. He probably just shook his head and thought, it's going to take another 20 years or 2,000 lifetimes. I loved Germany, don't get me wrong, that was great. I loved my life there. But the banking, it wasn't really for me. So what I did when I was about, I think, 28, something like that, packed in my job, packed in everything in Germany, and took 6 months off. And I found myself, during that time, back home with my parents, and my mum introduced me to a guy, an Indian guy called Karaj. And I remember having a conversation with him, and he said to me, so what are you up to? And I said, well, to be honest, I've taken 6 months off. I packed my job in and I don't really know what I'm doing. I just know that what I was doing was not for me. And I fully expected him, especially as a friend of my mum's, to say something along the lines of, well, that's not very responsible, is it? You can't just pack your job in. But what he actually said was, make the most of it. You may never get an opportunity like this again. And in that moment, I thought to myself, here's a guy who's saying things that I've never heard before come from the mouth of an adult, a grown-up. He's saying things that give me the feeling that he's worth talking to, that he's got answers to my questions. And so it was. It took another couple of years of me going back and forth to Germany, back to banking, finding out once again, rediscovering that it wasn't for me, and finally ending up back in England working with him. So this is where part 2 of the story begins. I had a friend of mine who lived about an hour's walk away from Farage's house, and he let me stay in his place for 2 years, rent-free. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything. For those first 2 years, it had been building up. For the first 6 months, maybe let's say 12 months, it was just me and Courage most of the time. The main focus of the training was weekends. So people would come to the house on Friday evenings, like from 6 o'clock onwards, anything between 6 and 8 people would arrive. And then we would sit there and we would talk about our respective weeks. And we would come with agenda items. So we'd have things that we wanted to discuss, issues that we wanted to resolve, things that we wanted to prepare for the next week. So we had sometimes 20, 30, 40 agenda items for the whole weekend. And then we would sit together. And that would go from Friday, say 6 or 7 o'clock, through to midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning maybe. And then we'd meet again at 9 o'clock on Saturday. We'd perhaps do some physical work in the garden, digging and construction and all sorts of stuff. That work in the garden was a wonderful way for your behaviour to come to the surface, because when you're focused on drilling holes and digging buckets of earth out of the ground and working in some sort of team, then you don't have time to second guess your behaviour and try and concentrate on other things. You've got to concentrate on the thing that's in front of you. So especially in stressful situations, your behaviour just comes to the surface very naturally. So then we had, for the rest of the evening, after a full day's work in the garden, all the material from the day to reflect on, to work with. Also the agenda items were still going on, so we'd take stuff from the garden work and say, okay, what was going on with you there, and how does this relate to your agenda items from your week? Boom, it's like Tetris, 4 or 5 agenda items would go from one incident in the garden. They'd disappear from the list. They'd be sorted. But then maybe other things would come to the surface because of what happened in the garden during the day. And then that whole session would go. We'd finish maybe sometimes at 8 o'clock at night in the garden, and then we'd do another 4 or 6 hours of the reflection work till 2 or 3 in the morning. Sometimes the latest we did was 5:30 in the morning, and then we were back there at 9 o'clock. On that particular occasion we had a lie until 10, but normally we're back in there at 9 o'clock on a Sunday, and we do the whole thing again, and we finish at midnight. Constantly being challenged, constantly having yourself under the microscope and putting yourself there and putting other people under the microscope and not letting each other off the hook. That takes courage, that takes effort, that takes energy, but you've all signed up for it really. As much as it's difficult for you when you arrive on the Friday, when you leave on the Sunday, you're skipping down the steps, down the pathway to your car because you feel so light, so unburdened. I mean, if you were to ask me to tell you about Courage, I wouldn't know where to begin except to say that he was completely uncompromising, completely consistent, single-minded, single focus on holding a mirror up to you. Yeah, he was uncompromising. He never let anybody off the hook, and it was almost his duty to challenge. And sometimes he would say, this is hard, but I have to do this because otherwise I'm letting you off the hook. And that's not why you're here. You came here to seek the truth. He had this knack of lifting you up when you were down and bringing you down when you were up. If you got too excited, he'd ground you, and if you got too low, he'd remind you of your progress, or tell you to enjoy the fact that you're tired. Or very loving, caring man, but absolutely uncompromising. It changed my life at such an early stage of my training anyway, that the breakthroughs that I made, or the positivity that I felt at the beginning, kept me going through the difficult times, to the point where I just thought, I need to leave, I can't do this anymore. And we both agreed with each other that it was time for me to go. training finished right at the very end of 2003. I left on New Year's Eve 2003 and went back to Germany. And I didn't do anything with the material I had. I had all this written work, but I did nothing with it for a number of years. Partly because there was so much of it, and partly because it was so personal. I just thought to work my way through all of this would take me so much time, I couldn't find the motivation to do it. In 2008, I met her. I talked to her about the work that I'd done and the training and everything, and she said to me one thing. She said, you need to do something with that. And that's what's happened. What happened there was I decided to take my journals and put them online. Not everything, not word for word. There was going to have to be an editing process, take out stuff, to take out the important stuff really and put that online, put that into a blog somehow. And what I decided to do was to do it in real time. So I took 4 years of journals, or 3 years, 7 or 8 months I think it was, and put them online in real time, which meant I started with the very first journal entry, which came from the 7th of March 2000, and put it on my blog on the 7th of March 2011. And then every day for the next 4 years, I put a journal piece online, always 11 years after the journal entry had been written. And while I was doing that, I was writing new stuff, standalone pieces about personal development itself, or explanatory pieces about the stuff that I was posting from my journal. And what I ended up with, at the end of that 4 years, what was that then, 2014, at the end of 2014, I ended up with 2 sets of blog entries, the journals and the new stuff. And towards the end of that process, I started to think to myself about conversations that Courage and I had had years previously about putting a book together, using my journals to put a book together that could somehow use my story to help others with their journey. So that's what I started to do, and I did exactly what I'd done with the journals, with the blog entries. I took them all and I edited them down and I put them together so that the 2 entries are kind of lying on top of each other, the 2 sets of entries are lying on top of each other. And that became the book. The book is called Evolution by Natural Reflection, and that finished in 2015. I've got a copy with me. So this is the final book. And as you can see, it's pretty thick, and this represents only half of what's on the blog, and on the blog represents only perhaps, I don't know, 60-70% of what's in my journals. But the point I want to make here is, having gone through my journal stuff to put it online, and having gone through the online stuff to put it in the book, I must have gone through the material 20, 30, 40 times. And what that did for me was to effectively put me through the whole training again and again and again, to the point where I'd wrung it out like a sponge and got as much as I possibly could from the whole experience. And this is, when I come to talk about the instruction manual, this is one valuable lesson that I've learned, not just to write stuff down, but also to read it back, and read it back as often as you possibly can, because you'll always make changes to it, but you'll find things that you didn't realize were there. You'll remind yourself of stuff that you've forgotten. You'll see how well you've done. You'll see what you need to be doing to continue to progress. So again, it's not just important to write stuff down, it's also important to read things back over again and again and again. Think of it like a shopping list. When you go to the supermarket, you make a shopping list. But if you're anything like me, when you get to the shops, you don't look at it. It's important to look at the shopping list while you're in the shops to make sure you get the stuff that you went there for. So this is kind of the same thing. Don't just write stuff down, but read it back again, over and over again. Because the benefit for me, personally, of doing that has been huge. So that brings us to the end of part 2. Finished. That was the end of, depending on how you look at it, a 4-year project or a 15-year project from start to finish. And the question for me then was, what do I do now? What do I do now that this is finished? And what I then embarked on was a journey of discovery for myself, really, of what lies beyond my own instruction manual. And what I discovered was, online there's so much more material that was not available to me when I was 15 that allowed me to find my way back to kind of things I was reading in my childhood. And what I spent the next 2 or 3 years doing was listening to people reading up on stuff and finding that actually the stuff that I couldn't understand when I was 15 now made a lot more sense. And for me personally, there's a belief that I had to go through all of the stuff that I went through with Courage to look closely at myself, because what Tile 9 is all about is that we're not who we think we are. Just as I was saying when I was 15, we're not who we think we are. We are a product of our environment. We are a product of the world that we live in. And that when you look beyond that, beyond the veneer of personality that we feel so invested in, there's a beauty, a power, joyful existence that has always been there. And that's, in essence, what Tile 9 is all about. The evening's coming to a close, and I'm going to close down this video by just saying that the realization for me, just through filming this video, has been that 35 years ago, I was kind of in the proximity of Tile 9 already, and yet, because it felt so out of reach, I fell into the arms of the worldly existence and everything that's around us, all the tangible stuff. And now, 35 years later, I stand where I used to stand. But what's happened in between those times is all the stuff from my training, the instruction manual stuff, writing stuff down, the realization that who we are it's not who we think we are. The work that I've done through my training with Courage and all the writing and all the work since with the book and the instruction manual, that's the really important stuff. And it's almost as if it was necessary to do that work in order to open the door to Tile 9. And I think that's the takeaway for me from this video, is that all you have to do is to make an effort to write a few things down. And then the more you do that, the closer you get to opening the door to Tile 9. Whether you go into Tile 9 or not, it doesn't really matter. But the door opens when you make the effort to discover who you are.